You mentioned earlier the ADA, which is the American with Disabilities Act. And this month marks the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So for our listeners who are not familiar, could you provide a brief background of the law and why it's important?
Absolutely. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed in 1990 by former President George H.W. Bush. It basically provides all sorts of protections and anti-discrimination for people with disabilities generally. So it prevents employment discrimination, discrimination from public entities and government programs, some certain government things, and also just public access. So think about when you have like ramps or sidewalks or parking spaces, like all sorts of different things, and that you can't be discriminated at work if you are working for a business with 15 or more employees, that there's certain procedures that they have to follow and different protections. So having civil rights is really important, especially because people with disabilities were one of the last protected groups to get civil rights protection. So with general civil rights with related to like race and gender and national origin, you saw those things in the 60s. You saw discrimination prohibited against people with disabilities for the first time in education and in programs receiving federal funding in the 70s. And then you saw protests and different demonstrations to try to get those enacted later in the 70s. So disability history is something that I'm starting to learn a lot more about, and it's super interesting seeing how this has happened. But the ADA was kind of that big cherry on top victory of that we have the same rights and protections as anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. Why do some critics believe the law should be repealed?
I think people have a misunderstanding of what the ADA is. Kind of what I've noticed is people think that it provides extra protections or it's kind of arbitrary, or you see a lot of drive-by lawsuits. So I think people think that it's being used to bully businesses or it costs them a lot of money, which isn't necessarily always true. Like people always will tell me like accommodations are so expensive. And I'm like, really? Because the average accommodation at work is under about $500 and a lot don't cost anything at all. Like if you go by what I would need to feel successful, perhaps it could just be wearing headphones. That doesn't cost the business anything. Or to be able to take a break or to break things up into smaller assignments is all these things don't cost anything. So it's really interesting kind of seeing what the perceptions are of people with disabilities and what people think we need versus what we actually do need.
Interesting, yeah. What do you envision for the future of the ADA?
I think the ADA needs to more explicitly cover the internet. Like the case law obviously has been covering the internet and judicial opinions, but I think it would be really nice to see that covered more explicitly in legislation. So websites are supposed to be accessible and compliant. So that way blind users can use them and they can be interpreted through screen readers and all sorts of great things to make sure that they're accessible to people with disabilities. So I would love to see more captioning. Again, I know we were talking about this with podcasts, but transcripts are wonderful because then folks who are hard of hearing or have auditory processing issues can follow along. Or some of us just prefer reading to listening because of our attention span. So I think accessibility is something that needs to be at the forefront. And accessibility doesn't just benefit disabled people, which people often think it does. Think about closed captions on TV. Closed captions originally were intended for deaf and hard of hearing folks. But at the same time, plenty of other people will watch TV with closed captions. People who might be learning a language for the first time and that's not their first language.
Exactly.
Or people like me who stop the TV every 5 seconds and go, wait, what did that person just say?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of accessibility things end up benefiting as many people as possible. And even just how our sidewalks are designed they were designed for wheelchairs, but they end up being easier on cars and people walking. There's so much about accessibility that generally benefits everyone. And I'd like to see that more of a priority.
Mm-hmm.
And more of a standard than kind of an afterthought.
Yeah. You've been watching Autism Knows No Borders. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know what you think in the comments section. Click here to watch this interview in its entirety. You can also find us on your favorite podcast app. Tune in each week for engaging conversations of how people across the globe are inspiring change and building community. Thanks for watching. Take care.